All right, and I'm going to call this meeting of the Rockport Select Board, a special public meeting, to order for Thursday, December 8th. The first item we have on the agenda, again, I'll remind everyone, please mute your cell phones, and if you need to talk on the cell phone, you really should step outside or at least close the doors so that we aren't part of your conversation. Public comment tonight. We are requesting that you keep your comments to the library. Also, if you would please be brief when you make your comments, and please try not to just say the same thing somebody else has already said. So with that, does anyone wish to start with public comment tonight? I see a gentleman starting right now. So.
My name is Dwight Johnson, resident of Homestead Lane for 28 years, my wife and I. I'd like to have a prepared statement I'd like to read. Our family, the Ingrahams, has been and remains deeply committed to the Rockport Public Library. Our library roots are deep. Maynard Sr., Lynn, my wife's grandfather, was involved with the building of the current library. Joyce, my mother-in-law, served on the library board and ran the library for Marjorie Dodge when she took an extended leave. And there are still Nancy Drew books that say Lynn Ingraham, Pascal Avenue inside. We care deeply and fully understand the history and emotional ties to the current library site. As many of you know, Maynard Ingraham Jr., my father-in-law, loved Rockport. It was truly his lifeblood. His last letter to the editor in 2014 supported building a new library on the RES site as he believed it to be the best option for Rockport's future. He had been part of the difficult decisions to move other town facilities. Each move involved emotional, financial, and logistical difficulties. Yet where would we be if the fire station remained on Russell Avenue, or the town garage on the corner of Pascal Avenue? And moving the town office to the former Hall property now seems obvious. We believe that the current library site is not adequate for current needs and is a major part of the reason for the recent negative vote. Voters want a reasonable, appropriate size and design as recommended by experts with guarantee of room for expansion for future needs. As you may know, Lynn, my wife, chaired the MSAD 28 school board during the new elementary school project. During school discussions, people asked for a site and design that could easily accommodate expansion if and when necessary. We as a community agreed to the extra cost to have the new school ready for another story to be added. That was a large financial commitment, but assured voters that we were ready for the future. Library voters, we believe, also want to know that there is space as well as a plan for future library additions if and when the need arises. The 1 Lime Rock Street location does not allow for future needs and, in fact, is negatively impacting the design possibilities for current needs. The 1/2 acre site dictates a more costly 2-story building. Because of the previous vote not to use the RES site, we have heard objections to revisiting that discussion. Citizens voted against building on that site because they were told in mailed materials that the current library could be renovated. After the engineering study and presentation, it was clear that not even the foundation of the current building was salvageable. The vote was based on inaccurate information. Additionally, the 2016 vote rejected only ever being able to build at 1 Lime Rock Street. Thus, we feel that the RES site remains a viable option. Maynard and Joyce, my father and mother-in-law, lived on Pascal Avenue and watched the volume of traffic increase exponentially over the decades. Reasons for the recent increase, as you know, include avoidance of the stop sign on Elm Street in Camden, driving to new YMCA, and using the easier back entrance to Quarry Hill. The downtown area of Rockport near the library is often so crowded with cars and delivery trucks, especially in the summer, that it is difficult to see people in the crosswalks. If we as a town were to develop criteria for a new library site, size...
Not me.
Turning my volume off.
If we as a town were to develop criteria for a new library site, size, topography, traffic flow, and so on, we would not believe that the current site would even make a long list, let alone move to the top of a short list. Thank you for listening. We know you understand the importance of this discussion to Rockport's future. We appreciate your service to the town of Rockport. Signed, Joyce Ingraham, my mother-in-law, who lives in Rockland but with a heart for Rockport. Peter and Laura Johnson, my son and daughter-in-law, and myself, Dwight and Lynn Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you. in disclosure, I asked Emily Lusher here to speak tonight at this time about the survey, and that it may guide some of our discussions before we actually get to the idea of taking a survey, so.
So Bill gave me an introduction. My name's Emily Lusher, and some of you may know that I did the early library study 4 years ago. However, that study was basically pitched to me originally as just a customer satisfaction study for the library. There were questions about the building, but that was not a major part of that study. So I'm not here to advocate for research, but I urge you that if you decide to do research, that you do it right. Do something that you can have confidence in, something that gives you hard data, quantitative data, data that will help you make decisions about what you have to do. Don't keep talking to the same people who are activists. Don't do listening tours and focus groups that are limited to the opinions of a few. And how would you do that? First, don't try to do it yourselves. Use professionals. You didn't design the new library building yourself. You didn't inspect the current library yourself. Research isn't an amateur activity. Second, you need to ask the right questions. Ken did a great job of listing all the possible answers. But as a survey, I can tell you it would be very hard for people to answer that laundry list, and it would be very difficult to analyze. Again, a research professional knows how to phrase the questions. I wouldn't try to forecast the weather for maritime enterprises the way Ken does. Third, you need to be comfortable with the research process and be confident enough to accept the results. If you go in skeptical, all right, we'll do some research, you'll be wasting your time and possibly your money, and you won't get what you need. You need to buy into the questions and the process so that you're not in the end saying, oh, well, we didn't quite do it the right way, so we didn't get the answers we needed. You don't want to do that. One of my stories from my research career is I had a client who hired me to do some research on some condos he wanted to build. He wanted to know a certain location, certain price point, amenities, so forth. Did the research, came back to him and said, don't do it, there's no market for it. He did it anyway. A few years later, he called me and he said, those condos aren't selling. Can you do some research for me to tell me why? And I said, Kevin, save your money. Go read the report I wrote you 2 years ago. So you don't want to go into this research thinking, oh, well, I'll just ignore it if it, it doesn't come out the way I want, whatever. So, but enough about what I'm telling you to do. There's been in the past, some people have questioned when I did that other study, it wasn't professionally done, people said. Now, I don't usually talk about myself much, but I've been doing this kind of research for over 35 years. My last job before retirement, I was the manager of IBM Corporate. I was in charge of market research or research for all of the events that IBM put on worldwide. 2,000 events. I had to figure out what the marketing strategy should be for those events. I had a budget of well over $1 million, chose and worked with at least a dozen vendors, and worked out internationally in France, Japan, Germany, South America, and multi-million-dollar decisions were based on data collected by my department. So that's me. I'm willing to offer my services to the town in whatever capacity you see fit. I can act as a consultant, or I'd be willing to conduct the research pro bono with the exception of expenses and mailing and stuff. On the other hand, if you're not comfortable with me doing it as a resident, I've gone to a colleague in Portland who's a very capable young runs a research company in Portland, who's very capable, and gotten a quote from him so that if you wanted to do that. If you decide to do research, I would suggest a mailing to every household in town with a paper questionnaire and the option to do the survey online as well. It would not be wise to do only a web survey, because then you'd be leaving out people in the community that you want to hear from. And such a mailing would also be a great opportunity to get the word out about the issues and make residents feel involved. Just as a guideline, the vendor in Portland could do this whole process, but the charge would be $9,000. So anyway, I'm not going to go further into logistics at this point, but what I do want to say is, if you decide on research, that comes later, the logistics. However, I repeat, do it right, do it professionally, and have confidence in what you're doing before you engage in doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
My name is Jean Bubar. I live at 60 Main Street. I've always loved the library in the village. I've lived in the village since the 60s, but I am in favor of the RES site for a variety of reasons. And one of the reasons is that it is the gateway, and I think having a place where people are coming, a place where there are playing fields outside, I think that would be an awfully good invitation for people to come into the village and say, this is an alive community. They can't see that when it's up where the current site is. And if it were built down there, we wouldn't have to worry about rerouting traffic and doing a lot of or some of the cost of the proposed library had to do with just making it usable by people who drive in from other parts of the town of Rockport. I consider that the RES site is in the village. It may not be where the restaurants are and where the post office is, but it is the village, and we do have a few little businesses going on down in that part, and this might increase that. I also have an opinion on the survey, and I feel we've already been surveyed, and it doesn't seem to give enough proper direction, and even though the cost would be minimal, I myself think that we should skip the survey. Thank you.
Hi, Joe. Hi. Brooke Kehoe, Mystic Avenue. I'll just start by saying I'm not interested in filling out a survey until a few questions can be answered. Primarily, again, they concern the legal paperwork. I have deep concern for your willingness to revisit the RES discussions without addressing the legal ramifications that Rockport is going to face by ignoring Mrs. Bach's words. And we've been dealing with this for 5 years, and I really don't have anyone who's given me answers as to how Rockport is going to face her legal document and her very specific wording of, so long as the same shall be so used and occupied, referring to a library. Those two certain lots are parcels of land, the one where our former library is and the one that is commonly referred to as Memorial Park, were both given specifically to Rockport for use of a library and as quoted for no other use. I really don't have any answers as to what's going to happen with those parcels of land if the library is not on those lots. Further, I know that on tonight's agenda, there will be discussion about possibly tearing down the building, and I further have questions about that as well. I mean, I know right now we're in a temporary situation with our old building on the site, but what happens legally if it gets torn down without us having a plan to rebuild there, or having a plan to give the land back to the Bach family, or a plan to speak to members of the Bach family? You know, I don't know if this is true, but I heard a rumor that 3 years ago Rick Bates drove down to Pennsylvania. That's not true. Not true. Good. Okay, good. I'm glad I can be here to dispel that rumor. Okay. So just to confirm, no one has spoken to the legal counsel for the Bach family.
Well, that's not true.
Recently, we have.
We have.
You have. Okay.
There has been.
No,
there
hold
have
on, no, we haven't spoken to legal counsel for the Bach family. We've spoken to our own legal counsel.
been- Right.
Okay. All right.
The issue has been explored legally.
Okay.
Finally.
Okay. Great. So sadly, I understand working for a local architect who had nothing to do with any of the building discussion, someone completely separate. I understand that the library may need to be torn down. I get it from a financial and from a safety standpoint. However, a recent conversation with Tia Anderson at our local Habitat for Humanity, she said that, you know, she would like it if this discussion could be tabled, the tear down discussion be tabled, so that she could be given an opportunity to review the engineering study and see if there's any parts of that building that could be salvaged for someone else's residence, or salvaged for whatever purpose, you know, a local habitat program might have. So, as a working class resident who lives outside of the village, Mrs. Bach's gift of her 2 parcels is actually very dear to me. I have no illusions of the fact that I'll ever be able to live in the village. The former library was an extension of my home, which we visited several times a week for books and DVDs and to use the internet, which we don't have at home. As a non-sailing resident of Rockport, the library was the only thing that rooted me to this historic village. It's the only reason I came into this area. And I love the fact that whenever I entered my old library, regardless of my worthless last name and my less than glamorous income, I was an equal there. And it's the only place in Rockport where I really feel that way, have ever felt that way. At this point, with the temporary building, my son volunteers there once a week, sometimes twice a week, and the only time we go now is to pick him up. And in speaking of that, a few weeks ago when we were all here, it was mentioned that apparently there's upwards of 30,000 visitors a year to the library. And I am a little perplexed as to where those numbers come from, because I understand they're from possibly a door counter. So that means anytime I go pick up my teenage son, I'm being counted as a visitor. Anytime the mailman comes in to drop off a package, he's being counted as a visitor. Anytime Ben goes to lunch and comes back, he's being counted as a visitor. Anytime he walks in the morning, he's being counted as a visitor. So I don't know if that counter is really more indicative of how many times the door opens and closes than how many visitors we actually have. So I'm just, that's where I'm at. I would really like some clarification on the legal issues.
Thank you.
My name is Bob Baldwin. I live in Bob Duke's old house. That's on Mechanic Street. I've been confused over the parking issue. It's been talked about. It's been brought up twice here already tonight. And in light of that, back when the library was on One Lime Rock, I did a survey. I went 12 different days, and after consulting with the library, I tried to be sure to go when they were doing Maison and when the parents were coming to pick up their children, when they were most active. Now, I split the parking into 6 spots that are right in front of the library, right contiguous to the property, where you could step out and be on the property. And then there were, and then I walked, and I must admit I'm walking a little slower than I used to, but I walked for 60 seconds, and there are 35 parking lots within a 60-second walk. 2 minutes, there were 35 parking spaces within 60 seconds. There were 55 parking spaces within 2 minutes. And I've got it written down here, but I think it's 82 within 3 minutes. Now, what I found, I'm not going to give you what I found for all these more remote spaces. I'm just going to speak, to keep it short, on the 6 spaces that are in front of the library. Now, one of the things you have to know is that consistently, every single time I went, with maybe one exception, an employee of the Contemporary Art Center was always parked smack in front of the library, every single day during the workday. Now, what I found is I went 12 different times, including very, very busy times. I never, in every single one of those 12 times, there was always 2 spaces available among those 6. In other words, any 2 cars could have come at any time that I surveyed and stepped off into the library. So I think that that we need to approve that intersection, but from my study, and it was I did 12 different days, and I tried to do the busy days, as I said, there was never a parking problem.
Does anyone else wish to make a statement? See. All right. You can come on over and as well.
John Priestley, you've heard from me before, addressing the items that are on your agenda tonight. Well, since I'm an architect and I've been building and knocking down buildings most of my life as part of my work as an architect, I just wanted to comment on the consideration of demolishing the existing building. I saw the study of that, I guess you'd call it the engineering study of the building, wherein it was decided that the library should be relocated temporarily. That study pointed out some air quality issues in the crawl space. There's a bit of moisture, and that the attic was overloaded with books. It was an attic that was never designed for storage. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the existing structure. If there are mold issues, that's the type of thing that's easily remediated if it was decided that that building should be saved or added on to. I worked on the Shepherd block. You all know that. That building had a fire in it. If you can remediate fire, you can remediate mold, and it's done all the time, and the cost of it is a tiny fraction of the cost of new construction. Any structural issues with that building are caused by the fact that it's simply overburdened. It's overloaded with books. There was a proposal some time ago to expand upon that building. I know for a fact, as an architect, as someone who's designed many, many buildings of all shapes and sizes and has studied that site in particular, there is ample room on that site for a library, several times its current size. There's no question that it will fit on the site. There's no question that there are no issues with topography or any other challenges. It's just like any other building project. The site has some distinct advantages in that it's a location that is beloved by many people, and it puts an important civic institution in the middle of the village. If we strip all of those things out of the village, we don't have a village anymore. So it might be convenient to park in other places, but that's not what Rockport Village is about. If we made everything perfectly convenient, we wouldn't have the mishmash that has created this wonderful historic village. That's an important quality that people are not talking about. It's not just about parking. In respect to parking, and my understanding is those who favor the RES site, everything I've heard about that site is it'll be easier to get there and easier to park there. Well, we just heard from Bob that we don't really have a parking problem at this library. We don't have that many users. But further, I know for a fact that the Memorial Park and the library site and Lime Rock Street, taken as a whole, have more than enough space for all the parking you could ever wish for to service that library and add to the parking that we have currently downtown that would be used in a broader context for all the businesses downtown. It fits on that site, it fits easily, it fits economically. And I refuse to hear arguments that say it's not going to work, because I know that it does, period. I would like to second the comments of, Brooke, who spoke earlier about the legal issues. My understanding is that if the town builds the library elsewhere, that the Memorial Park and the library site revert to the Bach family. I can't understand why the town would be contemplating essentially giving up a property that it owns on the basis of that decision. I also can't understand it on the basis of the fact that we've already voted, and we voted to build there. Why is it that we're going backwards? The people have already spoken. We've made our wishes clear to the select board. Why are you even considering that? Why is it on the agenda? I appreciate the fact that those who favor that site are bringing up concerns. If the concerns are parking, I think we should put parking right up there on the list of all the other concerns that we address with this facility and make sure those people are heard and their concerns are addressed in the design of the solution. That's it from me. Thanks.
My name is Peter Vanderkeef. I'm not a spokesman, so bear with me as I stumble through a point I'd like to make to everybody. I'm going to read to you an email that I sent to the Board of Selectmen recently in hopes that they would consider it, and now I'm presenting it to you all for consideration. So again, bear with me as I read this. So, as a sideline supporter of keeping the library, a library, in the village, I often wonder, have any of the decision makers considered purchasing 195 Union Street? And for those of you who don't know where that is, that's the former doctor's office above Grafham's. Admittedly removed from meetings, public discussions, etc., concerning the library, perhaps this logical alternative has been discussed. If not, I'm surprised. If it has, of course, I'm embarrassed in not knowing. Seems like a no-brainer, on the other hand, to me. Should you not know, the building is on 1.4 acres. It consists of over 5,000 square feet of interior use on public water, sewer, 11 to 20 parking spaces in existence, newly built in 1996. It has a security system, it has air conditioning, it's in a business district, there are sidewalks, and I would suspect an opportunity to add a second floor would be relatively easy. The building could be used as a mother library, while the existing facility could be used for senior citizens and children's center, which seems to be gaining acceptance and encouragement throughout the country nowadays. The building has been on the market for an extended period, and I would respectfully suggest that the owner would be open to negotiations. Possibly oversimplifying the situation, I bring the above to your attention for a serious consideration and ask that you bring it to the public's attention at your next town meeting and meetings regarding the library's future. Oh yes, the idea of making the existing building meet significant requirement would surely be cutting the cost approach. That alone should generate some serious consideration. So my point is, in all of the discussions that I, again, have been removed from, so I'm somewhat embarrassed about that, it seems to me that the town is confused. There's a dilemma. And it seems to me that it can be easily resolved with the likes of some of the architects that are in here, some of the builders that are in here, at a cost that would be minimal compared to what the discussions have been. So as a sidelight, I just say, when in the eyes of intelligentsia do common sense, good judgment, and the sound of cost-cutting measures prevail as a means of a responsible citizenry representation. That's it. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you. Anyone? Yep.
I'm Bill Froelich, 105 Russell Ave. I've been listening carefully to everyone's comments. I'm a bit puzzled by the RES group rising from the dead to fight once again for their cause. My impression is that even though it was a non-binding resolution, that the town spoke on the issue of the RES site. I don't think that the what seems like more modest attendance at the temporary site indicates to me that having a new library around Route 1 is going to attract the same number of people that the old library attracted, however you count those who come in and leave, as the statistics argue, to reach 30,000 attendees during a period, I guess, of a year. So I would say that I thought we put the RES site to bed, or buried it, or whatever, however you want to describe it, but that it's no longer considered by a small, admittedly, number of people in the town to be an issue. Now, I'm also troubled by this notion that if my cousin Laura, who once lived in the town, had actually been here when the vote was taken, the results would have been different. I think everyone has this idea that if other circumstances played a part, that the vote against the current library, the vote against the RES site, would have been different. The fact is, even though I would really love to see us vote again for President of the United States, that we are going to have to live with the results of the election, and I don't know how many votes you can reasonably have on any subject before someone says, okay, I lost. Whatever the reasons, I lost. So I think it really would be a tragedy. Never mind having to give the land back to the box. That would be terrible in and of itself. But the integrity of the main street of the town, the wonderful ambiance created by that little library, the location of that little library, the fact that there really isn't a parking issue, that's like counting people coming in and out of the library. It's make-believe. There are plenty of parking places, and I, even though I'm now 80, have never felt that I couldn't walk for 3 minutes to get to the library. So I would urge you to think about keeping the library on the site, that you as a board and that the other committees, library committee included, seem to accept when the proposal was put up for a vote for the 9,300 square foot library. But I think there's another factor which I alluded to at the last meeting, and that is we want to have substantial support for a new library. I think an awful lot of people want a new library. What we're hissing and fighting over is what's a reasonable size for a library for a town of roughly 3,000 people, which has not seen substantial increases in population and which has roughly 300 children in it. My mind is boggled by this notion of building for the future. What makes us think after 20 or more years that suddenly Rockport is going to be the spot on the coast to move to, either after you retire or while you're raising a family? We are dealing with a population that has been fairly static. Let's not pretend that this is going to be a large community that is going to need all kinds of additional things in its library. So I would urge you to do something that may sound strange to you, but I think we've had enough surveys. I think it's very hard to develop an impartial or effective survey. Surveys cost money. Surveys take time. I think we've reached the point where we know we want a new library, but what we're in disagreement about is how large that library should be. And if a substantial additional number of people would give their support, including some money, to a smaller new library in the range of 6,000 to 7,000 square feet. Why can't we try that as a way of bringing the town together? Money is a factor, and $2 to $2.5 million seems to me like a lot of money, and therefore when I heard that it'd be possible to have two libraries that would cost us far less than $2.5 million, my ears perked up. But I think the way to get the support level for a new library up is to reduce the size. And I think that the vote on a smaller library would amaze people. There wouldn't be an issue of if my cousin had still been here, or if we had really known what was in the memo that was sent out, that we would have much closer to consensus. You're never going to get consensus, but you'd have a much larger group supporting the library. And I think we all want a new library. So please, Select Board, think about these things, take some initiative, and count our pennies, the town's pennies. Thank you.
Dave Jackson, 10 West Street, Rockport. I'm only going to try to clarify a couple of matters. I'm not here to make a long presentation. On the matter of this vote that we've referred to multiple times, back in November, the two questions 8 and 9, we keep referring back to those, but I think we're forgetting that there was a subsequent to that, there was a vote taken in June, taken on the people's referendum, and that referendum said if a library is to be built, it can only be built on one site, and that is 1 Lime Rock Street. And that vote failed by 430 to 308. That's the same, coincidentally, it's the same percentage that people keep claiming is the percentage that rejected the RES site. Now, if you interpret that vote, it's not for any particular site, but what it says is that people would consider a site other than than 1 Limerock Street. They don't want to be bound by any particular, they don't want to close all their options. So that was one thing. The other thing is, and I think Ben could comment on this, I work at the Camden Public Library, and I do know the inner workings of libraries to a fairly good extent. And I don't think that the 30,000 visitors a year is overestimated. In fact, I'm surprised that it isn't more than that. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ames Curtis. I think many of you know I'm Lazarus. I've risen from the dead to support the RES site. And I don't have to belabor a lot of the reasons I do that because I've said them many times at these meetings. But I do want to respond to a couple of things. One is I don't think those of us in favor of RES are in favor of that exclusively because of parking. I don't believe that at all. That's one of the major advantages there. But there are plenty of other advantages. So I want to put that clear. I think it would be a much easier and cheaper site on which to build. You wouldn't have the traffic issues that you have on Central Avenue. Construction vehicles could be off the road. It would be a faster building site. You could have a playground next to the playing fields to attract families. I think it has innumerable advantages, and I gave a list to the select board so they know what I believe in that regard. I also want to respond to Brooke about the legal piece because I know it really bothers you, and it does a lot of people. But I happen to have a relative who was the senior partner of an estate law firm in New Haven, Connecticut, who visited me last weekend. And this was following the discussion that you all had at the last select board meeting about the potential of a declaratory judgment. And I was discussing it with him, and he has handled cases like this many times. And he immediately said, this is a fairly simple, fairly inexpensive issue to be dealt with. And he's just done one pro bono in Vermont where he currently lives. And he said he's happy to advise over here. He's not a member of the main bar, but he has property on Swans Island. But at any rate, the declaratory judgment, as far as he was concerned, is exactly what the town could do to be able to claim ownership of the property because the bequest was made very specifically for what it was used for, the library. But the amount of time that there has been a library there satisfies the bequest. He states that in the ones that he has dealt with before, it's very rare for heirs to come back and say, oh, we want this property back. If it's been used for the purpose that it was given for an extended period of time, as far as they're concerned, typically, this is his experience, and I suspect it would be true for the Bach family, they're happy to let the town have the property for the purpose that the town chooses. Whether it's extending the park, whether it's selling it for a residence that's in keeping with that area, I don't know. It could result in tax income for the town. I'm also one of those who doesn't think a survey is necessary or another listening tour. I think most of us have enough sense at this point in time to know what we believe or what we think or what we want, and that I think it's just going to keep the dialogue going, and sides are pretty well established, I think, and we're trying hard to listen to each other. I know it doesn't sound like it, but I truly am trying to listen hard to the other side, and I can see the charm of that. I also believe that we could have a very charming gateway building on that other site, which is truly part of the village and is more accessible to so many people in this town who live outside the inner village. So that's all I need to say tonight, but I did give a letter to the select board with other points.
Does anyone else wish to make a comment? Thought you had a county budget meeting. Okay. All right. Oh, yes.
Hello, my name is Bob Hall. I live on Russell Avenue, right up from the library. And I just want to pick up on Bill's point of a bill for the future. I think most of us here spend half of our lives living and working without the internet. But if you talk to our children and our grandchildren, it's a different story. If you ask somebody who's 25 or under, what is the Dewey Decimal System? They will have no idea. If you ask somebody over 25, where would you go to do research? They'd say, to my computer. So the library as a place of research is basically going away. It's kind of a place where people feel comfortable and they go and read. Now, with that in mind, you ought to think about, I think, building a smaller and more focused library, as Bill suggested. That is, do we want to have X number of books, or do you want to have a selection of books that are most appropriate, that are historic, that are particular to this place, and have access to computers so that people can come and do research in the modern way? Again, if you ask kids, how do you research, they'll say, well, I'll just Google it. Well, if you have computers at the library, you can Google it, and it becomes a useful building. But you don't need a big place with thousands of books. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Betsy Elwin. First of all, I don't think you're hearing anything new. I think we've had so many listening tours and so many meetings, and everybody's been adequately able to express their viewpoints. There's a tremendous amount of information on the library's website, on the future planning tab, on the Rockport Library website. There's transcripts from the listening tours. So I think that the problem isn't that you don't have enough input from the public. I think there are a couple of problems, and one of them is that people are not always willing to accept the information that's been gathered. One of the pieces of information that was gathered was about the size of library that this community needs. And I don't think that we should just pull a number out of thin air and say, well, we only want to spend $1 million, so we should only build a library that's 3,000 square feet. I think what we should do is look at what the experts have said, and they've done analyses, and they've provided data, and they've used processes that libraries across the country have developed to figure out what is the right size library given the programs that we have and the population that we have and all those other factors. So I don't think that we should just say, well, the last vote failed probably because the library was too big, so let's just make it smaller. I just don't think that's the way to go. I think we have gathered tremendous amounts of information. We need to rely on some of the experts that we hired and paid for already instead of hiring new experts and then rejecting what they say if we don't like the results that we get from those surveys and everything else. So that's my pitch. I would say please rely on the information that you've got already and develop a proposal and then explain that proposal and explain why you think it's the best proposal. And people, I hope, will get behind it. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Please, come on.
Sally Cook, I live in the village. In terms of the library size, I mean, I agree with people who've said, I think the vote this past election reflects cost and size, not so much location. But in terms of the size, one of the regular library committee members, Stephanie Lash, consistently brought up the results of a very well-considered study called the Wisconsin study, which was in opposition to some of the figures that Steve Pagoni came up with. And according to that study,
Can you shift a little bit to your right so you're using the
yeah.
microphone that's in front of you?
According to the Wisconsin study, which is nationally accepted, legitimate, a town the size of Rockport needs a library about twice the size of the current library, which would be 6,000 to 7,000 square feet.
All right, we'll take one more. Yeah, it looks like two.
Work together a whole
Yeah.
lot, so why stop now, right?
We spoke at the last meeting a little bit. My name's Brinkley Thorne. I live in Rockport now, and Maisie Cox, my wife. Both of us were trained as architects, and we spent a lot of time in our working life really living in a downtown and thinking a lot about small-scale retail and owner-operated businesses, and renovated buildings on the main street, lived on the main street, ran stores, and eventually took on a larger department store that had gone bankrupt and worked on getting stores in there. And they were all owner-operated small businesses. And running a restaurant like Nina June, or on the main street of Rockport is really a labor of love, and it needs support. And I think that libraries have culturally always been in the center of towns. They're one of the great uses that generates a lot of foot traffic with a broad cross-section of people that use it and come in. And in that process, even if it's more inconvenient than another site, I mean, in the town we were in, the post office moved out of the downtown eventually to a supermarket site just outside of the town. And it was more convenient for parking. But it took a big chunk of the vitality around those 4 or 5 blocks around the post office, because people would come to mail letters, do things, they'd meet each other, they'd stop, have a cup of coffee, you'd see the full extent of the people in your community, all different kinds would use the post office. So the same way with the library, I think it cuts across a broad cross-section of people, and it's a very important sort of dimension to this decision if it's in the balance about size and program. I think libraries across the country, there's some incredible examples of all the things libraries can expand into in terms of adult education and community training programs, tech shops. All these things are sort of getting built on larger scale libraries. But that square footage in those programs is expensive, and it seems like we're coming up against the threshold of tax sacrifices that people are willing to make in this community of 3,000 people. I think we've all grown up, many of us have grown up, and in this community we're around boats and people that sail, and a lot of things happen in small spaces and can happen really well in small spaces. So I guess my voice too is that the library is a very key symbiotic relationship with the other businesses in the downtown. I think losing CMCA was a first indication of that. We've got Bay Chamber and the restaurants and so on, but I think we should really value the symbiotic relationship between the foot traffic of the library, the coming and going and crossing of people, and the vitality and life on that street. And there are 2 empty spots on that where new buildings are being thought about, to possibly a little hotel or some other thing, and I think that the library is an important piece for that. On the other side of the question, I think the RES site is an extremely valuable site with attributes that are really commensurate with a larger scale plan that I think this community should also preserve that asset until they've really done some serious thinking about what the best way to use that res site really is. I don't think if the library program gets cut back because of the size of the community and the cost sort of thresholds that we can do, you're then putting too small a use on a very critical strategic site. It would be really nice to build on a flat space. It would be nice to spread out on one story and take up space. It'd be nice to have lots of parking. But that site is not, I think that's underutilizing that site. So I think those things should really be thought about carefully in the larger strategy of the community as a whole.
I think the only other thing I would think is that I remember at the last meeting there was discussion about perhaps opening it up to another architect and looking, surveying for other architects. And I think you need to go back and work with the architect you have. I think you need to give him some of the feedback about parking or size or money and turn it around. I mean, architects are good at this. This is what we do, and this, I think this architect that's been hired is a good architect, done a lot of libraries. And I think that if you go with, talk about the feedback about budget or size or parking or whatever the issues are, that he'll be able to come up with the appropriate size. And if there's a feeling about the look or whatever, can change that and come up with a good design for that site. But, libraries have always been the center of the town or the village, any village you look at. And I think it's really important. And when you lose these pieces, they're lost forever. And I think it's important to understand what makes Rockport Rockport and know what those pieces are and value them and take care of them. And everybody should know that. You all should know that, the town should know that, and everybody needs to value those and nourish them and take care of them, because once you've lost them, and it will really impact the town, and we've seen it. Brink and I have worked in towns of all sizes, and this one town we lived in Western Mass, we gave our hearts to for 35 years, helping them really get the downtown going again. And we know when you lose these pieces, it's a big deal. So don't lose this one. It's important to the town.
I didn't plan to speak today, but I think I will, so I don't have anything prepared. But I'm hearing some sort of two things. One, opinions, which a lot of that has to do with our personal preferences. And it is just that, it's personal, and each one is of value to that person or other people who share their opinions. And then there's others. I'd like to be more kind of factual and not kind of go into the emotional side so much. I think there's something that we as a community need clarification on, and I look to you and also Linda as the town clerk to find out if we are correct that even though there was a vote in November of 2014 that said that, and I don't have, but Linda I bet does, the actual wording of it, but said that something about primarily we should look at developing a library on the RES site, and that was voted down. I think it was, 58%? Somebody had that in the audience, voted no. But then we also had a vote in June of 2016, just a few months ago, that said that a new library, anything done to the library had to be done at the One Lime Rock site. So I know the first one was not a binding vote. That was how it was described. And I don't know about the second one. Was that a binding vote? It was a binding vote.
If it passed, it was going to be it would have been binding.
Okay, so it didn't. Well, doesn't that supersede the previous vote? Isn't the RES site just as viable to be considered as any other site in the town? Okay.
That's what we're going to be determining later.
Okay, you can get back to us on that. But I think that's kind of a key part, because a lot of people who voted no in November of 2016 did it because they felt in their hearts that we were making a mistake not to consider putting a building at that site, which has 7 acres, it's flat, has high visibility. You know, when you think about building a building, there are certain things you have to tick off, and whether or not you believe parking is important, an awful lot of people do, to the point where Ben will tell you that when they first moved out to Route 1, one of the first things people would say when they drove in was, "Oh my gosh, it's so nice that there's so much parking here." I mean, that became kind of a joke. But it is important to the users of Rockport Library. So that's one thing. We need to clarify that. If we can consider RES, then I think we should. And I'll say why. I think that and you didn't really limit the architect to 1 Lime Rock Street in your instructions last year. You told them that they could consider 1 Lime Rock, Memorial Park, or a combination of the two. Several architects chose to just look at 1 Lime Rock Street, and they designed the building that they felt would meet the needs of the library. How many books do we have? How many people come in? How many programs? Libraries are more than just repositories of books. They're really civic centers for a community. And I thought Reed and Company did a really good job trying to figure out how to find program space, shelf space, square footage that would meet what we need today. And because there were some of us in the audience saying, don't just do it for 2016, plan this for the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. It'd be great if it were 25 years. This building would adequately take all the needs of the town's library. I mean, this is fun, guys, but we don't want to be doing this for the next 16 years. But I think that having to shoehorn a building on a half an acre of land necessitated them to make it a 2-story building. Because it's a 2-story public building, you have to have certain amenities, like an elevator and like 2 staircases, which adds to the square footage of the building and doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it being a library. I would like to challenge Reed and Company, because I think they're a good company. What could you do with the same programmatic space in a 1-story building, no elevators, as the RES site? They designed a building that was going to have, I think, was about 7,300 square foot for program space. Now, that doesn't include the elevator or the staircase. It doesn't even include the bathrooms. But I suspect if it were a 1-story building, it wouldn't need 5 bathrooms. So I think that the site has an awful lot to do with the design of the building. Sorry. It's hard, which then has an awful lot to do with the cost of the building. I was not a huge fan of the way the building looked, but I know because I asked the architects, why do you make it look like this? Why is it a brick exterior? And they gave me a very fiscally responsible answer, because it is the least expensive facade to use for upkeep. Well, since it's a municipal building, and I was thinking to myself, maybe that's why the town office and the fire station and the high school, and they're all brick buildings, because they require the least amount of expense to keep them going as far as upkeep. I think those are some of the considerations that we need to weigh the pros and cons of. I also want to make the point that, yes, we do have, I think it's last count, something like 3,300 citizens in the town of Rockport. But we need to think of, I'm sure those 30,000 visits to the library don't necessarily represent citizens. They represent users. And just as I use the Camden Library and have even been known to go to Rockland, I know we have a lot of people, card holders, who don't necessarily live in Camden. I mean Rockport. They do. They might live in. Thank you. And I think that what we need to think about when we are trying to figure out how to build the library that we need now and going forward is how will it be used, who will use it, and how can we afford to do that? And if we can't, we better know good reasons why we're building a building today that by the time we open the door, we know it's going to be too small. Because to me, that's just irresponsible. Thanks.
We need to now start moving on to our own discussion. We have been at this for over an hour now, and I think it's time for us to move with our agenda. Board?
Yeah. Fine with it. Here to
Okay.
listen.
All right, then there'll be
One more
two
thing
more.
to say.
Steve, would you come on over?
Yeah, it's
Steve.
it's high time that this town defined the village. I live on West Street. I'm paying taxes as if I lived in the village. At one time, for those of you who maybe are more recent arrivals than some of us, that area around the school, RES, was a thriving part of the community. There was Ingram's General Store for longer than even it was there when I got there, and then it was replaced by Guido's, and then there's an antique shop. Right now there's a little bakery. It's closed more than it's open because there's nothing else to draw people there. At one time, we had a very active elementary school there. People walking up and down that street, the traffic, it was a lovely thing to see, the families walking to school. So that part of town now is regarded generally as if it's not part of the village. And the village seems to be defined by this precious 2 little acres that are 2 blocks that are on a curve, with everything crammed into one place. I just don't understand it.
Steve, did you want to make a comment? And this will be the last.
I'll be quick. I've lived in the village since 1978, and I've been on numerous committees. One of the recent ones for the last 10 years is the ORC, the Ordinance Review Committee. And over the last 10-year period, what we've tried to do is strengthen the downtown area to encourage businesses and uses, because 15 years ago you couldn't have a restaurant because it was a change of use, and you didn't have the parking requirements. You couldn't have apartments in the building. So for the last 10 years, we've been working very hard to reinvigorate the downtown, and Ken's on the committee, and today we even talked about boutique hotels. And so the effort has been to try to encourage the downtown to be able to develop and become a vital part of the community. And it had died more or less because you couldn't bring any new business in there. It was a change of use, and it triggered all sorts of zoning issues. So the library is an important part of that element. It obviously, whether it attracts 30,000 people a year, I don't know, but it's an important part of the element of the downtown, and it needs to be encouraged to stay in the village. I'm not going to get into the different votes over the years, but 20 years ago I sat on numerous committees for the planning of the new school, and it took, our kids were in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, and it was, they graduated from high school before we built a new school. And we went through the same process: size, money, location. And it takes a long time for the town to adjust to the changes of the community in the future. We designed a school at that point, which was for over 800 students. In reality, now we have 690 students in that school. So even though we think we're designing for the future, we don't know what the future is going to mean or bring to the community. And for example, there's a library in Texas now that doesn't have any books in it. So to think that there's a magic number out there that we can zero in today, it's really not precise studying or
programming that can determine that. So I think, you know, Rick Bates knows from being the town manager, there's a sweet spot in terms of what the community's going to approve and the cost. And I'll give you a quick example. When we were designing the expansion of the Rockland Library, the wish list was 15,000 square feet. The budget was 10,000 square feet. So what we did is we designed a 15,000 square foot library with 5,000 square foot expansion, but budgeted for the 10,000 square feet. And what happened, they were easily raised the money. There was like an 85% turnout in support of that. And then within the next 5 years, they expanded into that 5,000 square feet because they could pick off individual donors that wanted to finance the programs that were originally scheduled for that building. So we have the opportunity to hit the sweet spot with a slightly less budget, but designed for the wish list that everyone has, which I think we've come to. So I think that would be the goal. No one really has to compromise. All you have to do is make sure that you get the majority of the people supporting that number that we think is going to be the majority of the community, and then have the design available so in the next 5 or 10 years, if that's where the direction's going in this program, you can finance those added programs. So I think we ought to, you know, as a community, as Bill and everyone says, we want to come together as a group. We're really close to where we should be on this project, and I don't think we ought to get stalled out on sites and money and all the things that are divisive right now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We now set aside some time here where, if we wish, members up here can make statements, opening statements about where they, or we think we want to proceed or how we want to proceed. So I'll be dictatorial and start. And actually, yeah, you know, I think we should make at least one autocratic or maybe more, and this is using Brendan's terms. He's the guy that's not here tonight. Be autocratic and make some decisions, hopefully tonight. We may have to take another time. The first decision I think we should make is to make a clear statement regarding the location of the new building. Our decision should be based on facts as well as observations. One thing we do not or should not concern ourselves is the issue of the Bach deed. I say that based on what we heard this past Monday, that the law courts are finding that even reversionary deeds, such as the Bach deed, have a finite life, and it appears we may have passed that threshold, that finite life threshold. However, we should consider the impact of choosing one site over the other. What happens to the site not chosen? I should state that I might be perceived to have a bias in this matter. First, the vote taken a few years ago was pretty definitive against the use of the old elementary school site. However, the vote we took this June seemed to state the opposite. The vote this June was whether or not to keep it at that site. It would have been a binding vote had it passed. Since it hasn't passed, it doesn't place any restriction on us. I know that there's some people here that think that there's a groundswell to move toward the RES site. However, there's a number of other people who feel that we should stay at the One Lime Rock site. We need to make a decision. Second, until we settle the issue of location, every other question we face will have to be considered in light of 2 or more possible locations. Third, I firmly believe that the RES site has a better and higher use and could contribute significantly to the economic betterment of the town. And finally, the library in the village is a strong anchor contributing to the economic and social well-being of the entire town. It is a focal point that draws people to the village and the town. That said, if we want to bring RES back into the mix, why not also add the temporary location, and as one gentleman tonight mentioned, the 195 Union Street, the formerly Medcoast Medicine or Rockport Family Practice Both locations are for sale and could come with a clean title. The temporary location is 4,944 square feet usable and 4,999 a footprint. While at 195 Union, it has 5,098 usable and 5,297 as the footprint. We did briefly look at it when we were considering where to move the temporary location to. That location had just come on the market. We needed to make a decision on a location quickly. They weren't in a position to consider whether they wanted to lease it or wanted to try to have a flat-out sale. So we did move to where we are now for the temporary location. The second decision I think we should make is what to do with the existing building. As it stands, it is rapidly deteriorating. If you don't believe me, you walk by it and start looking at some of the clapboards. While one of the options is to do nothing, the cost of the demolition and any site remediation should not be considered part of the cost of a new building on that site. If we consider that in and don't consider that cost, if we move to the RES, we're not comparing apples and apples on cost. We're comparing apples less an orange or two. If we do nothing at this time, the building could become an attractive nuisance, and it is increasingly taking on the appearance of an abandoned building. I hate to see it become the target for pranksters or vandals. The third decision should be how much time we are willing to take before putting something back in front of the voters. Some have suggested asserting ourselves and making hard decisions so a new vote could be held at the earliest opportunity. Others have suggested we do a survey, either simple or complex. Additionally, it has been suggested that we have a listening tour. Actually, we discussed it Monday night, possibly concentrating heavily on the library. And as we decided Monday, our intent is to do that and be done by March 1, which further will compress the time available if we want to do anything or have anything before the voters in June. Ken, did you want to move next?
We have a tough job in front of us. After the meeting, the workshop of November 30th, the select board were urged to sort of take a more proactive role and to be bold. If we're going to be bold, we're going to make people upset. That's just the long and the short of it. In a little bit of a venting, I guess, the public hit us with a lot of arrows and barbs, and that's okay. That's what we're up here for. But the one that got me the most, I guess, is when people said they thought we didn't listen. And that was hard, because for myself, I read every email I get, I read every letter I get, I pay attention to public comments. We did listen. We can't listen and respond and make everybody happy. That's just the long and the short of it. So we have listened, and I hope that people understand that. The two main impressions I got from the meeting on November 30th, the two most common comments that I heard were make the library smaller, less expensive, and reconsider the RES site. I'm not saying that those are necessarily my ideas. That's what I heard. And quite honestly, we heard it again tonight. So we have to think about that. One of the speakers tonight, I'm sorry, I don't remember which one, talked about, maybe it might have been Pat, I guess, Reed and Associates. And I agree that keeping Reed and Associates on the job, they've spent a lot of time learning about our community. And that's an investment that we've made in them, an investment in time and in money. And so if we're going to move forward with something different, it seems to me that if we can stick with them, that we're going to be able to start a little bit of a jump start. And the interesting thing is, my perception, again, not based on any data at all, but just from the votes and the comments, is that I see the public breaking down about this way. 45% want a new library at 1 Lime Rock Street. 40% want a new library at RES, and 15% don't want a new library. If you take those numbers on their own, no question will ever pass. Not a single question about RES, not a single question about One Lime Rock, because of the way things are going. So if we're going to pass something, we have to do something that some people in some of those camps are going to change their mind. And that includes some of the people tonight who spoke very passionately about the RES site or about the One Lime Rock Street. The only way we're going to move forward with a new library, which I think most people want a new library, is if people are willing to move off their strong feelings one way or the other. So that's the task before us. I've talked about a survey, and yes, Emily, I'm not an expert at doing surveys at all. I just took a crack at it. I do think that we have received criticism about being opaque, to put somebody's words, about poor communication, and I think maybe we do need to do some outreach to find out a little bit more about why the votes. I gave my numbers 45, 40, 15, but maybe those aren't right. But the only way we're going to find out is to ask people. If we get that result, then I would advocate doing it fairly quickly. Then we can engage Reed maybe to provide us with some plans for maybe including the One Lime Rock site, maybe including the RES site too. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I said all along that I wouldn't support the RES site unless I heard from people who voted no on it for the 2014 vote who had changed their mind. I have now heard from some of those people. Personally, I'm not necessarily, I want the best library for the town. I'm not wedded to either site personally. But if we decide on a site, we're going to have a negative campaign again, I'm afraid, no matter what the site is, and I just would hate to see that. So perhaps put forward a couple of concept plans, maybe hold an open house upstairs, let people look at them, and then have a little bit of a straw vote, and then maybe pick 2 questions to put on the ballot, and then people can vote for either one, and we'll see what happens. Maybe they both fail. But if knowing there's going to be 2 questions on there, maybe that entices people in the design process to say, hey, wait a minute. If I'm an RES proponent, I've got to incorporate some things in that design that will appeal to the other people in the other camp. Or if I'm in the One Lime Rock site, maybe I need to incorporate something in the plan that's going to attract people who could look at it and say, you know, I was for RES all along, but you look at this wonderful design for One Lime Rock Street. I think I'll go for that. One way of doing things. As I say, you know, being bold about it, proposing something like this is going to make some people upset, and that's just the way it is. But it's a tough situation. I wish we could go forward with more positivity rather than negativity, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, Jeff wanted me to go next.
Because I got to play Brendan's recording.
Oh, okay. So, thank you to both of you. They put a lot of my thoughts into better verbiage. I've been mildly distracted, so didn't have the ability to write up a prepared statement. My apologies. So because of the listening and some of the things that Ken were talking about, there is a fair amount of confusion about where the town's at. There are distinct groups. You know, you have a vote that goes negative one way and then a vote that goes negative the other way. One was binding, one was not. You got to throw that into the mix. You hear from certain people, you don't hear from other people. You look at the numbers, it becomes, you know, a little bit confusing. So then you have to take a step back and look at some of the other factors. So I wrote some of my thoughts down. Tearing it down for me at this point in time doesn't necessarily make sense. I'm open to a conversation about it, but without a plan, a substantial plan on what we're going to do, and not knowing that that building itself couldn't be reused in some capacity, I'm not comfortable tearing it down at this point. On Reed & Associates, considering the amount of time that they've spent on it and money that we've given them, they have a good, solid understanding of that site, and I'd be very comfortable having them continue on in that capacity. On the Mary Bach deed, that's something that's been a frustration of mine from kind of the first month here for me on the select board, and I'm very happy that we're finally taking some good actionable steps on it. So I had pushed really hard to try to reassess the Mary Bach deed, not necessarily to resurrect the RES site, but to me it's unfinished business. It's a lingering question that when we have these votes, did you understand about the site? Did you not understand about the site deed? So again, that leads to confusion about how much did the general public know about this deed, and did we do our job on educating folks? When I voted in 2014, I wasn't aware of that deed. I voted in favor of the RES site. It seemed to make a good amount of sense. Coming across that deed really changed my mind a bit. Another thing, even though there is a substantial potential that we could get both One Lime Rock and the Memorial Park given to us in the declaratory judgment, I have become pretty concerned about what taking the library out of the village would do for a lot of our revitalization efforts. So that's something that's been kind of weighing heavily on me. But at the same time, David, you bring up a great point that back in the day, back in the heyday, that was a bustling metropolis. That was, a good center for people to be active, do a lot of interesting things. But I do tend to agree with Bill that that's a site that has a huge amount of potential. But I've also been told by certain people that if I sell that site off, I'm going to be blacklisted because that site was given to the town with a certain intent that it would be maintained as ball fields. Now, there wasn't the same deed that went with Mary Bach's property, but intent to me does mean something. So my notes on the RES site specifically says that it needs to be addressed to see what approach fits with the intent to which it was given to the town, while also providing some sort of economic opportunities and development that gets to revitalizing that area of the downtown. We've just now kind of crossed the hurdle of going over Route 1, so we have a crossway from that corner into the rest of Route 90 over into Market Basket. So there's some good potential there on that site. And when you're comparing and contrasting the two sites, which one, it's opportunity costs. What do you gain? What do you lose from having the library on one site or another? And I also don't think that we should really, though I completely agree that building a full-scale library for the future, whatever the future may hold, would obviously be the best thing if money was no object. Money is always an object. We have a lot of things coming down the pike. I am mildly tired of hearing from folks how much their taxes have gone up in recent history. I have friends of mine that are considering just moving further inland to Appleton, places where the mill rate's a little bit lower, where they know their property taxes will be lower. So that's something that for sure goes into my thought process. So the sacrifices that we've been making as a town to pay for some of the infrastructure that we want are real. And I was struck by, I can't remember exactly who said it, maybe it was you, Steve, that designing a library for the future, planning for a library for a future, but building the library that we can financially afford today, though I know that's probably not what Ben wants to hear, or a lot of people want to hear, but that's something that weighs heavily on me. So, just want to again touch on what Ken had said about the listening. And I can't speak for other select board members, but I too read all your emails. I attempt to reply to everyone that I can, so you know that your email has been heard. My apologies if in the last day I didn't reply to yours. But again, it leads to some confusion on our part. People have very valid arguments supporting their position. So if I was to spend all of my time listening to some of the RES folks, I would think that that is obviously the best site because they have very legit arguments that it is the best site. Parking just being one of the many factors that make it, reduce costs. I'm talking about cost here. But then you go to the other side and you listen to folks, that are passionate about keeping it in downtown and it's a staple, and what happens if we move it and remove it? What does that do to the downtown? What is the downtown? What is the village? So it raises a lot of questions. For me, I'm heavily leaning to keeping it at the One Lime Rock site and being very open to scaling it back on financial costs, though making it clear that we would be building a library properly set up to expand into the future. and we'll see how the rest of the evening goes. And thank you all very much for coming out. Really, it's your passion on this issue that makes it such a difficult decision for us on our end. If it was everyone coming in here saying, ho-hum, we don't really care, and I only care about costs, then it's an easy thing for us to do. But your passion comes out in your statements, and thank you all very much for taking an interest in it.
Mr. Chairman, I actually have a recording from Brendan, who
Okay.
had his statement recorded. Can we do that?
Does this include the I feel good?
It doesn't.
Citizens of Rockport that I'm unable to be here to participate in the discussions this evening. Many of you took the time to email me or call me in the last few days to express your concerns and preferences about the future of the library. And I regret that I only found the time to respond to a portion of those emails. To my colleagues on the board, thank you for the opportunity to contribute an opening statement to tonight's discussion. I will restrict my comments to the topic of library location for 2 reasons. First, I believe the spirit of collaboration and compromise still exists in regard to all aspects of the future library with the exception of location. Second, the siting of a building is inherently antithetical to compromise. It is not possible to meet in the middle. There comes a time when a decision is required, and frankly, that time has already passed. The community we serve has repeatedly demonstrated that they cannot and will not arrive at anything approaching consensus. It's this board's obligation to settle the matter. In doing so, you will inevitably upset, frustrate, and even anger a significant portion of our community. Carry out your responsibility nevertheless. In doing so, you will provide a critical service and allow that portion of the community to direct their anger and vitriol at the board rather than at one another. When I joined the board a short while ago, the issue of the location of the library was settled. I heard this from every member of the board, from the town manager and from the chair of the Ad Hoc Library Planning Committee. For the entirety of my admittedly brief tenure as liaison to the Ad Hoc Library Committee, the issue was closed. As you deliberate tonight, I hope you will have the courage and courtesy to clearly communicate 2 pieces of information. You should not need the results of a survey to do so. What criteria did you use to arrive at your decision to restrict consideration for the library location to 1 Lime Rock Street? What is your criteria for determining the library location today? If they are not the same, I urge you to take the time to present a clear and thorough rationale as to why. To the citizens of Rockport, especially those of you who clearly care so deeply about the location of our library, I want to state clearly and unequivocally that I am not on your side in this. I simply don't agree or believe that our lovely village will wither and fade without a library at 1 Lime Rock Street. I'm equally unmoved by arguments that the RES site is somehow safer, smarter, more democratic, more accessible, more economical, or an otherwise more responsible choice. They are options, nothing more. Each plot of land presents beneficial attributes and drawbacks. In my own deliberations, I've reached a point where I believe moving past this endless argument has become more important than the library location, size, cost, or appearance. Moving forward, I intend to serve your interests by doing whatever I can to put this behind us as expeditiously as possible. With apologies in advance, I'm prepared to disappoint, upset, frustrate, and anger a significant portion of you in the process. Thank you for your time and for the opportunity to serve you as a member of the Select Board. Regards, Brendan Reardon.
Wait, so what does he want to do? Other than piss all of you off and have you yell at us? I'm a little confused.
Several people have said that. We should be the ones to yell at.
Oh, I'm fine with that, but I just didn't know why they were going to yell at us. Like, which group of people was going to end up yelling at us? Both of them? Great. Perfect. Thanks, Brendan.
Okay, Jeff, did you want to say anything?
Yes, of course I want to say. How do you know me? How do you know me not to?
Hey, I'm really happy that we're all laughing. Thank you, Brendan. That's way better.
So, thank you. I've heard my esteemed colleagues. I disagree with some of them in some respects, but that's all of our privilege. First of all, in this case, it isn't time for me to promote my own point of view. That's not what's needed right now, and would be just as divisive as the war that we have about the elephant in the room. So obviously the elephant in the room is the location. So there are a lot of people that want to have the RES site considered again. A lot of people want to have it considered again. And those people who say that there aren't much can only see what they feel that they know. And of course, there are many who say that, who would get upset at, quote, reopening old wounds. I'm not sure what the latter group is concerned with. Is it that the reconsideration might possibly yield a change to the site, not of their choosing? And if that's the case, how would that compare to how the RES site people feel right now? One of the things about a survey is that we do talk to other than the 75 people who come, you know, day after day. There was one gentleman who was happy to meet, whose name I didn't know, but everyone else's name I had typed up before you got to the podium. That's not necessarily a good thing in terms of listening to people who are disenfranchised. What I am looking for is to bring this community back together from its fractured state. The best way I know how is to open up both sides for an honest reconsideration, but then to track each and every aspect of the decision process and publish a Q&A that will address a lot of the misinformation on both sides. So very few of us are architects and builders, and I dare say that we're all carrying around at least a few presumptions that are not supported by the facts, both sides. So it is my hope that we dig down to the facts, even if they're the very same facts that the previous ad hoc library committee considered, and we need to publish each point of that so that people have spoken to. So with that in mind, you know, I have 15 pages of notes from the last two meetings. We all have 35, 40 letters. What I want to do is take each of the aspects that people say, this is better because of this is better because of this, and actually list those assets and say, is it or not? And that would come from a mythical committee. Excuse me. There are, is it cheaper to build on RES site, flat site, for instance? Maybe yes, maybe no. There are other challenges at that particular site. I'm hoping that everybody in this town will take time to read this chart that would come out in March, one hopes, that says yes, no, or maybe, and then read a 1 or 2 paragraph analysis of each of those elements. So who do we charge with this work? It is my hope that we will convene a new ad hoc library committee filled with energized people knowledgeable about the building trades, design, communication, and the dynamics of this town. But one of our most important lessons is that this committee needs to have the strong leadership, but from both the select board liaison, whether that's 1 or 2 people, and from the board itself. It's my hope that if all of these meetings are streamed and all of these meetings are open to the public and all of these meetings have an abundance of good food and drink of the non-alcoholic variety, we will have a much better foundation to move forward in March with the most major decision having been made, that being the location, and made in a way that includes as many voices as possible. So during the same time frame between now and March, I fully expect this committee to also be communicating with architects, both Reed and Company, the architects that made bids in the first place, and other architects, because it's my understanding that Reed and Company would invite a new process by which they can either reassert themselves or they can gracefully bow out. And it's my understanding that there's at least one of the architects that did a presentation that would like to make a new presentation. So if these parallel tracks go on, we hit March, beginning middle of March, with a lot of information, with decisions being made and going forward. Whether we can make a June vote, I don't know, but I think that that is the method by which we get, and someone talked about change, you know, that Ken talked about the sheer numbers. Some people are going to have to give way. And the most reasonable way to have people give way is to say, oh, I didn't realize that I was wrong on this. I was right on this for my favorite site, but this is a wash and I'm wrong on that. Therefore, I'm going to be more, it's going to make it a lot more easy for me not to hold a grudge for the next 25 years. We still have people in this town holding a grudge about the Harbor Masters building. You know, it's like, oh. So what I want to do is I want to have the least amount of grudges the next time we vote for this. For the record, in terms of declaration, I'm not worried about the Bach deed. I think legally we can look at either site without prejudice. I am under the very strong notion that good architectural design is site-specific. You don't pick up the design for one site and plunk it down in another. That does mean if we go a long way in looking at 2 sites, it's going to cost us money. That's just the way it is. And while I understand people's concern for the notion of acceptable parking, I personally do not see, I promised at the head I wouldn't do this, didn't I? Well, I think good design yields good parking, and I think we can have that on the places that people don't think we can have it. And because I promised not to bring up my own opinions, I'll not read the last two paragraphs.
Thank you, Jeff. Rick, did you want to say anything?
No, this is your show.
Okay. Okay.
He's going on vacation in
Yeah, I'm
2
going
days.
on
He wants to
vacation.
get out of town in one piece.
Actually, he's going to be on vacation tomorrow.
No, not tomorrow. Sunday.
Oh, Sunday? Yeah.
Holiday in the Harbor on.
You're already on
Remember
vacation.
Holiday in
You're,
the Harbor
you're
on
already in
Saturday.
vacation mode. Okay, let's come back to the agenda. Do we want to make any adjustments to the remaining portions of the agenda based on what we've heard already? The next item, if we follow the agenda, the next one is discussing the existing building, opening communications, location, survey, direction setting, and when do we meet again? That was the order. We don't have to do them in that order, or we can just skip over one or two, or gloss over
Why
one
would
or
we
two.
skip over any?
Yeah, let's just proceed.
Okay. Yep. All right.
I mean, they all have to be dealt with.
Okay. The first one is dealing with the existing library. We have heard a number of the people that have sent us emails have said that we shouldn't tear it down right away. We should wait until the final decision has been made. My concern is just with the deterioration of the building. Rick commented that we're not in a high crime area. The likelihood of vandalism or pranksters is very low. It only takes one. So, that's my statement.
Now that you've put it out there for the suggestion.
Not my intent. I'm just trying to voice reality. So,
Personally, I think it's a unnecessary provocation and a poke in the eye to to the process. I don't see any reason to take it down at all, and I think taking it down is not good mojo. I think right now it's like, well, haha, see what we can do. And there's no particular reason. There wasn't a particular reason 2 months ago, and just because of the suggestions at the last meeting, it still doesn't change anything for me.
remember I said at our last library meeting here, I was trying to be provocative?
Yeah, no, there you go.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't heard a clear and compelling reason to take it down tomorrow. One of the interesting things I heard tonight was possibly reusing for Habitat for Humanity. I think that's a great idea. If we can preserve some of it and take it down and get another use out of it, that would be great. One of the few things that I think we have come to agreement on as a town is that building really doesn't have any useful life left in it as a library. I think that we've heard from people on all sides who pretty much agree with that, with a few exceptions. There have been some others I want to say. I've listened to those who say, yes, we could renovate it, but that number is a fairly clear minority. There was some suggestion that tearing it down would send a sign that we're going to do something or other, but like Jeff said, that would be a provoking sign. I don't think we need to. As long as the building isn't a hazard, and I think Rick has told us that it isn't, it's been pickled, I think was his word. In other words, the pipes aren't going to freeze. It's been taken care of that way, so I don't see a reason to rush ahead and do that right now.
Yeah, except for all the hooligans that like to watch select board meetings, I'm not really concerned about. I don't have a compelling argument to tear it down. It doesn't make much sense to me.
And I guess we can move on then. I think we're pretty much in agreement. We don't need to take a vote to keep it. It's already there. Okay. Opening communication. It has been raised several times that we need to communicate better. The idea of sending out like a postcard mailer, if we're gonna do a listening tour, which we've said we are, we need to get that information out. At least when the dates and where we're gonna be, so people can come. Beyond that, how do we improve communications? How do we get to more people?
Well, I actually want to turn that around and ask the audience that's here, are we doing a measurably better job in the last 4 weeks than we have before on this particular issue, or not?
Really? Oh, good.
All right. So what that suggests to me is that you have to plant seeds in a lot of different gardens. And the communication is 3/4 of it is our responsibility in where we go and how hard we push out there. And then the remaining quarter, which is kind of the more exciting thing, is people owning the issues enough to talk with their neighbors and say, you got to get down here and do that. So thank you very much. That's what I'd hope that the bulk of the audience would say. But we can't let up on all the different avenues, and we can't let up on finding new ones. But we can also take the input, like, is the calendar on the website clear enough to give people clues to what's going on and all this sort of stuff. So I think we know what to do, and I think that we have to not be afraid of a 500. I don't know where we get it, and I want to be very sensitive to that. But I think we don't need to be afraid of a $500 postcard, for instance, to get it out to everybody, things like that. So diligence.
And Rowan?
I can just tell you what I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with how much. Should we just make a decision so we can move on? Or do we open ourselves up to what could potentially be 6, 9? I mean, as a lot of people pointed out, we've done a lot of surveys, we've asked a lot of questions. Yes, you're right, we haven't done a good enough job to mitigate a lot of this confusion that I was talking about. So the things that you're laying out make complete sense if you're trying to get a very good clarity of thought for this board and a clear direction. But as Brendan pointed out, this has been going on for a while. Are we going to continue to plod along to get perfect when done might suffice? So that's what I'm struggling with, because I agree with you. The approach, if we're doing better with communications, if we can glean better insight and try to get the best possible proposal, I'm all about it. But at the same time, how this has been going on for a while, we do have the ability to show leadership and make a decision and take the slings and arrows from folks that disagree with us and say, my apologies that you didn't get your way. We attempted to move this along in an expeditious manner to save money on a temporary space, and we'll give you another thing to vote on, and if you turn it down, we'll again scratch our heads and go, okay, Jeff, what did you say about communication? So,
oh, it'll be my fault.
I could kind of go either way. If other folks on the board felt that they were at a good place to make a vote on at least finalizing the site, I would be okay with that. But at the same time, if there's a compelling argument that we should delay it and continue information gathering and seeing if people want to fill out another survey, okay. Ken?
My concern is with communication is that, and it's wonderful that we have this turnout tonight, and we've seen many of you several times over the last many meetings. But I wonder if we should be thinking about casting a wider net to try to get more input from the people who aren't here. Because we're hearing the passionate people tonight, and other people may be passionate too, but for whatever reason can't attend an evening meeting. And maybe direct mail is the way to do that. I'm not sure. Maybe a survey is the way to do it. One thing about a survey that I will say, and one of the reasons that I made the proposal that I did with the survey was, whatever we do has to be fairly short and sweet, quite honestly. And Emily may have a different opinion, I guess, but I think in order to get people to participate in it, it's going to have to be something that they can look at, make a fairly quick answer to whatever question it is, and then send it in. It can't be something that's many pages long, that requires a lot of time that a lot of people in their busy lives don't have. But I think that trying, and time is short too. I think we'd have to do something that we could wrap up by, let's say, the middle of January, the end of January. But trying to get a wider cast, it'd be nicer to have, and all you folks are wonderful for coming out tonight, but if we had 3 times the response of the number of people in this room, then that gives us a little bit more information on which way the town goes, because, I mean, one of the things that people are saying is that we have to make it, we don't get to make the decision, you folks have to make the decision. Our job is to craft a proposal that gets put in front of you from which you can make a decision. And we have failed at that so far. Everything we put out in front of you has not been approved. And so it would be awfully nice if we could gather a little bit more information so that the next time we put something out there, that it might have more widespread approval.
Mr. Chairman?
Just with the, on the subject of communication, I feel like I'm saying this over and over and over again. The idea, you know, there's been some talk about not everybody being connected to the internet. You know, one of the things we discovered with the work that we did on the fiber was, and the reason we're not eligible for a lot of grants is because we are a connected community, that a large portion of our population is connected, and a large portion of our population does use the internet. Right now, there are 21 people watching, and there are a batch of them communicating with each other through the chat function on the live stream. People are talking on the internet, and they communicate with each other on the internet. For us not to tap into a digital means of having a dialogue and allow those people that don't have the time to come to the meeting to express their opinions, I think is a mistake. I think we really need to utilize some online component and digital component of ways to allow people to give us their opinion. I mean, surveys are important, and we all get them, but how many of them do we get in the, you know, I think it's important that if we do a survey, that we need a mail component of it in this case. But how many mail surveys do we get anymore? Most of the surveys that are done are either on the phone, you know, they're the pain in the neck ones, or ones that are done online. And you get them, you know, I get them all the time. I have a tendency to participate them if it's easy, because I can just click right in, do it, boom, send it off. I don't have to put a stamp on it, I don't have to do anything. So I think we really, when you're talking communication, it's got to be many layers of communication effort. And I think we'd be remiss if we did not have a component that was digital and allow people online.
Do you suggest that we actually go to the point of making these comments part of this meeting so that the other people here can
Well, like up
can
on
know
the
that?
big TV? So
Well,
we can
I'm
see
not
'em and
sure.
read
I mean,
'em?
that's one of the possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. There's, I mean, it's a.
Because so long as it's not sniping, it is a
it's not.
reasonable, I mean, it's a part of the same conversation that you guys have advantage of because you're here right now, so.
Well, there are 21 people watching. There's really about 6 or 7 that are making comments.
Sure.
But those are people that are.
But those are 6 or 7 additional people.
Right.
I yield to the chair, who may yield to Maisie.
Jeff has asked that Maisie.
So I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I've just, in another town, a little bit bigger than this, over the last year, we were involved in a couple of urban design issues. And they had hired a very well-trained person who had come up with a very good solution for a complicated problem in the town. They put it out to the public to vote, and each side, there were 2 different, like here, 2 different points of view, 2 different points of view about what should happen. But each one, as we saw in this last election, there was a lot of false information. And the issues were very complicated. And in the end, I think what I learned from it was the decision that came out was not a good decision. And the reason is, if you ask people, do you want this site or that site, it's very complicated. There are a lot of issues behind it that people don't really understand what they're voting for. And that's where I think we have to look to you, taking advice from professionals about which is the right site and why. And Brink has used this example talks about this is, I almost think this is a moment where you have to jump up a level and not get caught in the weeds. Like, what are the really important issues here? And I do think one of them is keeping the library in the village for a set of reasons, and also that the RES site is a very important site for future development and needs a lot of thought around that. And you can debate it this way and that. But I think you have to be very careful on this survey because the questions people this is what I've seen in this town, and that's what I really want to address, is if people don't really understand why they're voting for one or the other. They're going to say, I want this or that, but they don't really understand all the issues underneath it of why a professional might say to go one place or the other. And so I'm just cautioning you to be careful.
Did Emily leave?
Yes, I think she did.
Oh, she did, okay.
Could I ask a super quick question?
Okay.
How many of you folks, if you're not here but you know we're meeting, click to channel 22 to see if we're on and then go, oh, it's still not on? Really?
One.
Man, I do it all the time and I'm at the meetings. So channel 22 is the local access to where you can watch the select board meetings if we're on, but we haven't been putting them online or
Up
on
up
television.
until 9 months ago, and then we had a broken piece of gear, and we haven't fixed it. We haven't fixed it yet.
And if it was fixed, would you watch it at home instead of pulling up the live stream? You live stream it? Oh.
Dr. Charbonneau would go to the television, but.
I don't think we can chat without having to use our computers if there's 2 or 3 of us in the room watching it on TV.
I can crank the volume. My kids think it's funny to see me on TV.
We do too.
All right, I was hoping for more hands than that. Thank you.
One question I want to ask before we move too much further from this is, if we do send out mailers, how should we be sending them out? Should we be sending them out as part of that direct mail package, that it just goes in every mailbox that is in Rockport or over at either the Rockport Library or the West Rockport Library? Every physical thing. Oh, yeah, the post office, sorry. Or do we send it to the registered voters?
Well-
And, because they're the ones that are gonna be voting, and some of them live in Rockport but have post office boxes outside.
So all of those questions are what the professionals guide us with, and all of those questions are more of a workshop question. In response to Maisie's thing, I agree with you 100% that design by committee yields horrible-looking animals that live in the desert. But on the other hand, if we use a survey to create the list that asks all the questions, and then we answer all those questions, then this board makes a decision. We say X or Y. Those people that don't understand why could look at a document and could say, oh, I understand now that this is not what I thought it was, and blah, blah, blah. And even if all things are equal, maybe the board says, keep it in the village because of the, what it brings to from an economic development, from a sense of village, whatever. But all of that, you could point to it. I don't feel as though many people were able to, or felt comfortable, or felt facilitated in watching the conversation over the last 2 years. I think our mistake is that we kept things at arm's length, and that that the various committee meetings and the various decisions were not ever intended to be made in secret, but they were made without much fanfare and without much background that went out to the public. And that's what I want to change. That's what we have. We're talking about communication and what we need to do, and what I think that we've revitalized it because we've taken it closer to us now. We're not saying, you guys do all the work and we'll announce it once every 2 months. So that's the critical component. Whether we have a survey or not, what we need to do is to gather all of the reasons that people want to do one or the other, and then we need to address all those reasons.
We also revitalized it because the vote failed, and the vote failed by a very slim margin. And I've probably talked to the 9 people that said, if it was a little bit cheaper, I would have voted for it.